Alright, let's look at Standard 12. The student will analyze important consequences of American industrial growth. And if we look at 12, it has 4 substandards, A, B, C, and D. Let's jump in this first one. Describe Ellis Island, the change of immigrants' origins to Southern and Eastern Europe, and the impact of this change on urban America. So, reading this, we see that a change will occur in immigrants' origins. Immigrants, migrant means to move. Immigrants is people who come into the country. There's going to be a change in the location or origins or where they come from, and it's going to change to Southern and Eastern Europe, whereas it used to be some other place. So these new immigrants are going to come from Southern and Eastern Europe. Very important to understand that. When they come to the United States, they're going to enter at Ellis Island in New York City Harbor to enter the country. And when they come, there's going to be some type of impact on the United States and the city part of the United States and America, and we call that urbanization. So our focus here is on immigration and urbanization. Two things. Themes are immigration, migration, and urbanization. We're going to talk about Ellis Island. We're going to talk about the origins of these new immigrants. Let me put that there. New immigrants. And then the growth of urban America, or the growth of cities. Those are the things we're going to talk about. Those are the themes. So we see a change in America. It's going to be caused by this surge of new immigrants coming into the country, and this growth of cities, this urban growth, and we're going to refer to that as urbanization. Alright, let's look at where immigrants used to come from. This is what we call old immigration, or old immigrants. And we go all the way back to the colonial period when we talked about. These are where the immigrants come from. You know, England and Ireland and Scotland here. And, you know, France and some of these other areas here in what we call Northern and Western Europe here. This is Northern Western Europe. These are where a lot of the settlers and immigrants coming to the New World. These are locations they come from. All right, so old immigration refers to in the beginning of our country, before the Civil War, from 1607 until now. A lot of the Europeans come from Northern and Western Europe. And we see that compass rose north and west. This part over here is northwest of Europe. All this is Europe here. Alright, so new immigration refers to the change in the origin or home place of immigrants coming to the United States. New immigrants come from, the new immigrants are going to come from Southern and Eastern Europe. When we say new immigrants, we're talking about immigrants that come to the United States after the Civil War, all the way up to 1900. So Southern and Eastern Europe, you see, is in a different location. Here's the Northern and Western over here. We whited those out. We wanted to see where these new immigrants were going to be coming from, this new immigration. Southern and Eastern Europe, you see here, over in Russia, Italy, Poland, Spain, Portugal, all around here. These Balkan countries. This is Southern and Eastern Europe. So our standards describe the change in immigrants' origins to Southern and Eastern Europe. So we see that. We see that these new immigrants are going to come from Southern and Eastern Europe down here. That's Southern and Eastern Europe. This over here in gray was old immigration. That was Northern and Western Europe. So that's the change. And when sometimes in some classes they'll talk about push factors and pull factors. Basically what they mean was what made these immigrants leave their home in Southern and Eastern Europe to come over here. Well, a few things that made them leave, these push factors that pushed them away, were farm poverty and worker uncertainty, and wars that were going on, compulsory military service, political tyranny, religious oppression. You know, especially the Jewish citizens that left were leaving for religious oppression, and so they left for those reasons to come to the United States. And the pull factors are what things pull them to America, what causes them want to come here. Well, the first and big one is freedom. They wanted freedom. Then opportunity was the next big thing. So, and we had plenty of land and plenty of work to do. We had a higher standard of living than they did in their countries. and democratic political system somewhat. Now, are we saying that Northern and Western European didn't give us any immigrants at all? No, we're not going to say that. But what we're going to say, if we look down here at this graph, from 1870 to 1900, we see that this green line is increasing. And what we mean is this green line here, Southern and Eastern Europe, the people coming from here. So this one's going to be increasing while the rest are decreasing. You see Northern and Western Europe in purple decreases. And if you notice, South America is going to decrease. And then Asian immigration is going to increase and halt altogether by 1882. And we're going to talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act down here that happens in 1882 on further into the unit. We'll talk about it last, I believe, but that blue line is why it almost collapses to nothing. But the green line is what we're talking about here. Southern and Eastern Europe is going to increase the number of immigrants we get from there. Another line we can look at, or graph, shown here, we've reversed the colors here, but Southern and Eastern Europe is in burgundy color. If you see from 1870 to 1900, looks just like the one we just did. It increases slightly. But see, by 1920, look at what happens to Southern and Eastern Europe immigration. And by 1915, around the time of World War I, we're going to talk about, an extreme drop here. We're going to talk about in the Bolshevik Revolution and the Red Scare that comes afterward. The United States stops immigrating people from Southern and Eastern Europe. But that's in the future. But we look at it like this too. There's many ways we can look at this through graphs and charts and stuff. But 1881 to 1890, this blue part is Southern and Eastern Europe immigrants. Northern and Western Europe is the red. We see that blue increases up to 1910, almost overtakes it 3/4 of the way. And then by 1920, decreases a tad bit. And then we see it going another way. But between 1880, especially in 1920, Southern and Eastern European immigrants are going to come into the country. And here's a different way of looking at it, this new immigration. If we notice Southern Europe and Central and Eastern Europe are in the blue and the pink, look how much is there between 1901 and 1920. The pink and the blue. Look at that. Southern and Eastern Europe immigration. And we look at millions of immigrants, coming from these places. And look at what happens to the green, Northwestern. It decreases. But that's another image we can use. So, where are all these... That what we just discussed was the change in origins, or where these new immigrants are going to come from. They're going to start coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. And we see that through this burgundy line here on this line graph, the number of immigrants coming to the United States in this one. So where will they come? And we need to talk about Ellis Island. Describe Ellis Island. Ellis Island, we've talked about before, is in New York City, in the New York City harbor. And if we went there, again, I like to use Google Images. If we took Google Maps and we went down, and you can do this on your computer, go down to New York Harbor here. And one of my earlier videos, I told you it was on Staten Island here. What a upset that was. I made that mistake, I'm sorry. But here's New York Harbor here as we come in off the Atlantic. And if we go a little closer, see these little islands here? As we get closer, here's lower New York right here, lower Manhattan. And let's get a little closer. Here's Ellis Island, and this is a Liberty Island. The Statue of Liberty you'll see is on this little island here. And here is Ellis Island right here, all in New York Harbor. Let's back up a little bit more. There it is. There's New York, there's Ellis Island, there's New York. That's where all these new immigrants are going to come in. And this is coming out into New York Bay here, coming out to the Atlantic. Let's back up here. Ocean. Let's go look. Alright, there's the Atlantic Ocean. Across this ocean, right over here. Okay, so that's where Ellis Island is, and if we want to look at it a little closer, there they are right there. Here's a picture of Ellis Island, and this is a picture of the Statue of Liberty that's on Liberty Island. A lot of these new immigrants that are coming, most of them come from Italy, Poland, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. And they're going to come into the country. They speak a different language, so they're going to be discriminated against when they get here. A lot of nativism, or these people who are here, their fear of people who have a different religion and a different language. So, alright, here's Ellis Island here. All immigrants coming into the East Coast are going to come by way of the Atlantic Ocean, come to Ellis Island here. And here's the Statue of Liberty on Liberty Island. It's not on Ellis Island, it's on Liberty Island. Liberty Island. Okay, and here's another shot of Ellis Island here. They come in here, get dropped off, and go when they're released down this road here, and out they go. Here's a shipment of immigrants coming in to Ellis Island. Alright, let's change this focus real quick. It says, describe Ellis Island, which we did. The change in immigrants' origins to Southern and Eastern Europe, which we did. And the impact of this change on urban America. So we're going to look at the impact of the change, this influx or surge of immigrants coming to the United States. They're going to live in cities because that's where the factories were during the Industrial Revolution. And the factories are located in the cities and centralized there, so a lot of rural workers are going to move to the cities, and then all these immigrants are going to come to the United States hoping to have a job and a new life and a better life for themselves. So this overcrowding and other social problems start to exist within the cities, and it brings up a lot of political problems on how to deal with this change. So we have all these people rushing into the United States from Southern and Eastern Europe, and so the United States is going to experience urbanization. And urbanization is, let's go over the definition before we look at this, the physical growth of urban areas, in other words cities, as a result of rural migration and even suburban concentration into cities, and these immigrants coming into, particularly the very large ones, like New York City, New York, Chicago, Illinois, Boston, Massachusetts, Cincinnati, Ohio. And characteristics are overcrowding in housing, in the streets, overcrowding, unsanitary conditions, no working plumbing, no ventilation in the buildings, air conditioners or anything, dirty streets and alleys, poverty and homelessness. Some non-examples of urbanization or rural areas are out in the country. And around Bainbridge here, Decatur counties, Attapulgis, Wiggum, McRaeville, places like that. But what we have here is this central core of cities in this red area here, because we see that once they reach New York City here in Ellis Island, if you notice, over a million people in this large red bubble here in New York City there, and we see 1.5 million there. Jersey City, 163,000, Rochester, 133,000. But look at Chicago, over 1 million people, or immigrants, are going to go to Chicago. So we see these cities like Philadelphia, New York City, Chicago, and Brooklyn even picks up a lot, and St. Louis down here, and St. Louis, Missouri, and Cleveland, Ohio picks up a few. Cincinnati grows. Baltimore, Maryland's going to grow, and we see all these cities or urban centers growing in population. And notice the less than 10%. Look at Bainbridge and Decatur County. So we stay pretty much a rural area, agricultural area. But the 30% or more, if we look for those, and in the green there, we see in the large cities areas. Okay. Let's look at Chicago, and let's go back to Google Maps. Okay, here's Illinois, and here are the Great Lakes. Here's Lake Michigan here, and here's New York here. And the people got to Chicago either by going up to Hudson and across the Erie Canal, or by train across the Appalachian Mountains to Chicago. And Chicago's going to grow in urbanization. A lot of people are going to move out there. Let's see if we can get a little closer to Chicago. There's Chicago on Lake Michigan, one of the Great Lakes. It is here. And Chicago is going to grow, and a huge amount of population is going there's going to be an influx of that into Chicago there. Here's a city street in Chicago, Dearborn Street, in 1909 to show you just how busy Chicago was going to become because of these new immigrants coming into the United States. As they get here, they're not going to assimilate or mix in with the cultures that are already here. They have their own language. They usually are Greek Orthodox or Catholic or Jewish. They're not Protestants. You know, some of the older immigrants, they were Protestants. They spoke English, you know, and so they were expecting these new immigrants to mix in with them, learn English, you know, have a Protestant religion, but that just didn't happen. So a lot of nativist attitudes started coming about where they feared or did not like people who were different from them, like these new immigrants. And we see that the Italian section here in Chicago, and we see the Polish sections in different areas. These little ethnic ghettos, the German little areas, are going to be right here in Chicago on Lake Michigan. We see that happen a lot during this urbanization period. Even in New York City, you know, Little Italy on Mulberry Street in 1900, that a lot of these people were Italians. Their stores were Italian stores, you know, they sold Italian goods, Italian food, you know. So we see these little enclaves, ethnic ghettos forming in these cities as these people don't really assimilate well, but they create their own little cultures in these little enclaves here. Alright, so we see that the change in the United States is a surge of these new immigrants come from Southern and Eastern Europe, and the growth of the cities, urbanization or urban growth, is going to change America. And in several ways, not for the good. It's going to be good and bad, but we see one thing is marked by is extreme poverty here. Political corruption and graft, you know, Boss Tweed in New York City, that ring that's going to pay these immigrants right off the boat to vote for them for some clothes or for a job or some type of material gain. We talk about that in AP US Government, but not here in AP US History. Let's try to get our spelling correct over here. Extreme poverty, political corruption, overcrowding, and tenement housing. I'll show you a picture in a second about tenement housing. Unsanitary water, no filtering or anything like that. We're going to talk about cholera and how the outbreak killed a lot of people in the city. Fire hazards, you know, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company was a fire that killed over 150 women working inside of it in New York City. Child labor, unequal pay, long hours, unsafe working conditions. These are some issues that were going on during industrialization, during urbanization and immigration in these large cities. So we could put those into four categories, into housing, health, working conditions, and political machines like Tammany Hall graft or corruption. Graft means the corrupt way that Tammany Hall operated. Child labor, disease and sanitation in health areas, bacteria in the streets and in the homes, housing in the tenements and the slums. Let's go ahead and go to that. They come here looking for jobs during the Industrial Revolution. They go to Ellis Island, and when they get here, they find a lot of things they really didn't want. Overcrowding in the cities, people are going to be shortage of housing. In New York around 1900, these tenement houses where these people lived crammed in together. Here's another one here, shows you all the people that lived in one room here coming out. You see a lot of these clotheslines hanging out where they can dry their clothes. No washing machines and dryers or luxuries we have today. In 1896 in New York City, tenements on the Lower East Side, there were about 1,500 people who died just from heat wave coming through. They had no air conditioning. There's no really good ventilation in these buildings. In other words, no health codes for fire or safety during this time period, and this is going to come with the reform movements in the progressive era. And a lot of them died from cholera, bacteria in the drinking water supply. So there was no sanitation, water sanitation department, no water filters. Here's a tenement house where Jacob Riis took a picture. A lot of these pictures around 1900 when he wrote his book, How the Other Half Lives. So a lot of the male immigrants could expect when they got here to work a 12-hour work day, to live in these crowded tenements and work in these grimy factories and work 6 days a week, only making $597 a year. That's not good pay. But dangerous coal mines, and they couldn't speak English. They were uneducated. So these are the situations they come here and find, even though they're looking for a better life. Women work the same 12-hour work day. They're going to live in the same crowded tenements, grimy factory work, 6 days a week. They're going to work. They're going to get less pay though, $314 a year. Notice that men usually got, and on average, about $597 a year. Women got $314. They were paid less than men, so unequal pay. They're going to work in these tedious garment making factories, like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. That factory is renowned because of its unsafe area, and a lot of changes happen after that fire codes, because the owners locked the building thinking women would sneak out with clothes, and when it caught on fire it burnt almost everyone inside. But anyway, women couldn't speak English well from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they were uneducated. But these children are going to work too. As young as 7 years old, they're going to go to work in factories and mills. They're going to be paid less than men and women. They're going to work about 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. Okay, and that's horrible. But anyway, here's Butler Coal Breaker in Pittston, Pennsylvania. And here's some breaker boys that worked inside this coal mill here to provide coal for the steel companies and other companies that needed an energy source. Here's some young children that worked inside of this coal company. Here they are at work here with an overseer with a little switch to pop them in the head when they didn't do right. But there they are. How sad. They should beware. That's right. They should be in school. Here's a cartoon drawn. It's got child labor as a spider here. This is obviously one of the reform cartoons. And here's a child here, little girl. And in the corners you can read indifference, ignorance, what is this? Poverty, luxury, profit, and greed. So you can look at this and analyze it and see where it comes in. It talks about this child labor stuff. Here's some children working in textile mills, and there's moving parts. Really didn't have any protection for these children. They shouldn't have been in there anyway. But really, these machines sometimes have moving parts that jerk these kids right in there and take their arm or leg off. So many immigrants were so poor that children had to work. Parents let them work. The businesses took them. Look at these kids standing here. They should be in school, right? Okay, and here's a kid by the name of Harry McShane, and he's going to let's see. Harry was 16 years old. He lost his arm in 1906 in a factory accident. You see it's not there. His shirt's tucked into his pants, but his arm is missing. Lost his arm in a factory accident. Okay, here's a little boy, excuse me, looks like a little girl, but a little boy who lost 2 of his fingers in 1912. A piece of machine fell on his foot, smashed his toe, and then he fell forward into a spinning machine in a textile mill, and his hand went into unprotected gearing, and it crushed his hand and tore out 2 of his fingers. And this was in Sanders Spinning Mill in Bessemer City, North Carolina. It shows you what these kids went through. So are you glad to be in school today if that's where you are? Or are you glad where you are today rather than working like these kids do? You should be pleased that you're not there. So we see here that these people come here looking for a better way of life, and they get something unexpected because this urbanization and this industrial revolution, all these things that occur. And we see that these housing, health, working conditions, political machines, all these things that are not really good things going on in cities that need to be reformed. We're going to talk about how they are in the progressive movement. But did we talk about Ellis Island, and the Statue of Liberty here on Liberty Island? And did we talk about the change in immigrants' origins, where they come from? They started coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. Did we do that? I think we did. I think we looked at different ways that we could look at that, and different ways of looking at it. But we did look at how this Eastern Europe over here and Southern Europe down here, if we look at our compass rose, this is Europe, here's Southern Europe, here's Eastern Europe. This is their new immigrants. This is where they come from 1870 to about 1900, 1920. And there's going to be a lot of people coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. Alright, and then we talk about this change and its impact on urban America. I think we have asked questions in class. Look this over again. Read your study guide. Good luck on the test. Good luck on the EOCT. Our old immigrants, and we go all the way back to the colonial period. We talked about these are where the immigrants come from. England and Ireland and Scotland here, and France and some of these other areas here in what we call Northern and Western Europe here. This is Northern Western Europe. These are where a lot of the settlers and immigrants coming to the New World. These are locations they come from. Alright, so old immigration refers to in the beginning of our country, before the Civil War, from 1607 until now. A lot of the Europeans come from Northern and Western Europe. And we see that compass rose, north and west. This part over here is northwest of Europe. All this is Europe here. Alright, so new immigration refers to Eastern Europe. This over here in gray was old immigration. That was Northern and Western Europe. So that's the change. And when sometimes in some classes they'll talk about push factors and pull factors. Basically what they mean was what made these immigrants leave their home in Southern and Eastern Europe to come over here. Well, a few things that made them leave, these push factors that pushed them away, were farm poverty and worker uncertainty, and wars that were going on, compulsory military service, political tyranny, religious oppression. Especially the Jewish citizens that left were leaving for religious oppression, and so they left for those reasons to come to the United States. And the pull factors are what things pull them to America, what caused them want to come here. Well, the first and big one is freedom. They wanted freedom. Then opportunity was the next big thing. Alright, let's look at Standard 12. The student will analyze important consequences of American industrial growth. And if we look at 12, it has 4 substandards, A, B, C, and D. Let's jump in this first one. Describe Ellis Island, the change of immigrants' origins to Southern and Eastern Europe, and the impact of this change on urban America. So, reading this, we see that a change will occur in immigrants' origins. Migrant means to move. Immigrants is people who come into the country. There's going to be a change in the location or origins or where they come from, and it's going to change to Southern and Eastern Europe, whereas it used to be some other place. So these new immigrants are going to come from Southern and Eastern Europe. Very important to understand that. When they come to the United States, they're going to enter at Ellis Island in New York City Harbor to enter the country, and when they come, there's going to be some type of impact on the United States and the city part of the United States and America, and we call that urbanization. So our focus here is on immigration and urbanization. Two things. Themes are immigration, migration, and urbanization. We're going to talk about Ellis Island. We're going to talk about the origins of these new immigrants. Let me put that there. New immigrants, and then the growth of urban America, or the growth of cities. Those are the things we're going to talk about. Those are the themes. So we see a change in America. It's going to be caused by this surge of new immigrants coming into the country, and this growth of cities, this urban growth, and we're going to refer to that as urbanization. Alright, let's look at where immigrants used to come from. This is what we call old immigration, the change in the origin or home place of immigrants coming to the United States. New immigrants come from, the new immigrants are going to come from Southern and Eastern Europe. When we say new immigrants, we're talking about immigrants that come to the United States after the Civil War all the way up to 1900. So Southern and Eastern Europe, you see, is in a different location. Here's the Northern and Western over here. We whited those out. We wanted to see where these new immigrants were going to be coming from, this new immigration. Southern and Eastern Europe, you see here, over in Russia, Italy, Poland, Spain, Portugal, all around here. These Balkan countries. This is Southern and Eastern Europe. So our standards describe the change in immigrants' origins to Southern and Eastern Europe. So we see that. We see that these new immigrants are going to come from Southern and Eastern Europe down here. That's Southern.